All right, welcome back to Grimerica Outlawed. We have Gord Magill with us. Today, he's a dad, husband, trucker, writer, author of the upcoming book, Murder of the American Trucker, End of the Road. He's got a Substack, which is great. It's called Autonomous Truckers, and a podcast, The Voice of Gord. So welcome. All the links to all that stuff is in the show notes. Welcome to the show, Gord. Thanks for joining us.
No, thanks for having me, guys. Happy Saturday.
Yeah. Happy Saturday. So you're American now. When did you move from Canada to America?
Yeah, I got married to an American lady in 2013. We had like this weird long distance relationship. I was in northern Alberta working, and she lived in New York City. I ended up taking her with me to work in Australia. We spent some time there, did some traveling, came home, and wanted to start a family and have kids. So we decided to live close to her parents and her brother, and so here we are in Ithaca, New York.
So was that pretty easy for you to do the paperwork and all that and get over there?
No, no, I understand why people walk across the border, because doing it legally costs a lot of money and it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah,
and which is also why you'll never find anybody more anti-illegal immigrant than people who are legal immigrants.
Right. They've been through it all.
Yeah. What was the cost, if you don't mind me asking, at the end of the day? And what was the breakdown of expenses?
So to get a permanent residency card, I think at the time the government fees was something like $1,500, and then lawyering, filing paperwork, I can't even remember, it was thousands. They lost our application at one point, and because we were moving around different countries and trying to get the process also shifted, just because of the timing of everything. It just took forever. And like I say, they lost our paperwork and just lots of headaches. But I mean, eventually I got it, and I went and did the interview at the consulate in Montreal, and they gave me a green card, and I've been here for 10 years now.
It must be so weird because we started the show in 2013, right? When you moved, it must be so weird to watch Canada go through all this stuff while you're down there. I mean, especially because you've been paying attention to a lot of it. So do you feel fortunate that you got down there? How does it feel to watch us self-destruct?
It sucks because, I was born in Canada and I still, identify with the place, I guess. Lots of family there. It's a beautiful place. Lots of nice people. Lots of opportunity, lots of resources. It's just got everything you could possibly want. And it's just run by retards. Not to say that America is necessarily any better. It's just a different kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that are baked into the American character, which are lacking in Canada. Like, I like to call it small L folk libertarianism. So not like ideological libertarianism, but the sort of idea that you let people live and let live, and you mind your own business, and you try and do things in a cooperative, voluntary fashion. I mean, obviously, the government doesn't quite exactly work like that, but it's in their cultural DNA to sort of approach things that way. So I appreciate that about them.
Yeah. Up here in our post-national state, we like to identify as non-Americans.
It's so infantile, can't figure out our own stuff. Canada does actually have its own identities and whatnot, but you're discouraged from talking about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's it's an interesting time. Infantile is a good word to describe it. I maybe would have pushed back on that at some point, but I think since the election of Donald Trump, I don't think there's a better word to describe it across right from whoever gets it, 20-year-olds to 90-year-olds, with it seem to be more at the upper age of the spectrum that gets it worse, ironically, and are more infantile. I mean, the hockey thing it seems to be the icing on the cake. I mean, when you've got the Canadian reporters and the Canadian media are upset now, and they're talking about trading players out of cities because they won the US gold medal. I mean, we might as well be Russia at this point. That's what it really does sort of start to remind you. And it's ironic because of the synchronicities between this and that. What was that movie, Graham, where they beat the Russians in the got the gold medal from the Russians with the Hughes guy.
Miracle on Ice.
Miracle on Ice. Yeah. So we just did a rundown a couple weeks ago or last week about how the guy who scores the game-winning goal this year, John Hughes, was it John Hughes? Jack Hughes is the same player who gets cut in Miracle on Ice.
Same name.
Yeah, same name. So, but yeah, it's just interesting now to see that sort of. It never used to be like that, and I mean, the rumor going around now is that Wayne Gretzky wanted to go in and give these guys a pep talk before the gold medal game, and they were like, "Nah, man, fuck you." But it all seems to boil down basically, if you met with Trump, fuck you. And I mean, who wouldn't meet with the president? I mean, I'm not even like I don't like the government, and I don't like it's if anything, it's a chance to maybe speak your mind. But I mean, not many people get the opportunity to meet with the guy running the country for a photo op. I mean, obviously, most people. What would you do, Graham, if you had the chance to go get your picture taken with Carney? Would you take it?
Oh, I don't know. With Carney, I don't know. That's a good question. And throwing me a curveball there. I don't know. That's a really good question. I might not actually, but I don't think it's for the same. Like, it's not for the same Carney deranged. It's not for the same CDS reason. Like, we have TDS.
So wait,
like, and the problem is it's based on lies. Like, I have no problem with having political disagreements and all that kind of stuff, but it's when a lot of it's based on propaganda and lies. What?
Let me add some context to it. Let's say that because you played hockey at a high level, right?
Well, no, not ice hockey.
Pretty high level, like ice hockey. So just what if you won the gold medal and you're supposed to go meet Cardi?
Oh, yeah. As a team, I would. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It would seem crazy not to, right? It seems like, I don't know. It's the politicization is like getting into everything.
Yeah.
You know, it's like some of these things seem like they're immune. Maybe the sports. I don't follow sports close enough to know. I mean, maybe it was. I mean, they all sort of fell into COVID lockstep, but that was in some ways out of their control. But I don't watch it regularly enough to at least have it be that politicized. But when I was watching like Olympic hockey, I think the last Olympic game I watched was probably like the 2010 one, right? Was that when they won in Vancouver?
Yeah.
We were into it. We were watching, but we didn't hate the Americans over it. You know, it's just like we wanted to win. We did win. If we didn't win, I don't think it would have been a big deal. You know, like we've lost other tournaments to other people and not hated them over that. And this is a real childish way to react to.
Didn't Vancouver have some kind of riots when the Canucks lost at some point here a few years back? I seem to recall a pretty substantial, burning of vehicles and chaos in the streets of Vancouver.
Yeah.
Every time they lose, because they did the same thing like back in. I was a Canucks fan back. I think it was 93 or 94 when they lost to the Rangers, and
I lived there.
They burned the city down then too.
I lived there because the media kept saying how many people were downtown. They kept like advertising how big the riots were, and then by the time the final games came around, there was tons of people down there. Yeah, I think that something happened even when they won in the Olympics. I think in 2010, even it might have got a little rowdy. So yeah, we're not so virtuous as we say.
We did pretty good here, I gotta say. We had the Red Mile when the Flames did the Cup run in 2004. It didn't win. They lost in 7 games, and we didn't burn the city down. I mean, there was big celebrations downtown. I think the last night was probably a downer, but if I remember correctly, our big claim to fame was like a lot of girls showing off their breasts. That's sort of what happened during our Red Mile. I was down there once or twice when there had to be. I mean, I couldn't even put an estimate on the people, but it was, a
few 100,000,
10 or 12 or 15 city blocks of 17th Ave, Calgary, all the way down to the Saddle Dome, just sort of packed with people all the way down. And
back in the days, I don't think you could get that anymore.
I don't know if they don't want that sort of shit happening nowadays, because if you give a bullhorn to someone charismatic, who knows what's going to go on. I was actually watching a thing the other day that was this weird little conspiracy theory that Woodstock, when they tried to do Woodstock in 99, was it 99 or whenever they tried to redo the Woodstock, and Limp Bizkit played that Break Stuff song, and you see the crowd and there's just like hundreds of thousands of people going fucking bonkers. that was sort of and I think they did riot and burn the place down, and that was sort of when the establishment was like, whoa, wait a second, this could be a problem. And then they just sort of been infinitely dividing us ever since. I mean, it happened before then. Anyway, we should probably get back to the subject at hand. We do have a question in the chats about the attack on Iran. I don't know enough about the attack on Iran to really comment. I just seen something about Iran.
You don't have any thoughts on that, Gord?
I try and I have a sort of 24-hour rule with stuff like this.
Me too. 72 even better.
Yeah. So depending on the severity of the situation, and like I'm not a political commentator. What do I know? Me saying anything is not going to add to it. I'm generally speaking, I'm mostly an anti-war kind of guy, but I guess the Iranian regime is a bit of a pain in everyone's butt, and then you have to factor in geopolitics and China and all the rest of it. So it's a mess, and I don't know. So no comment.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. So, well, let's get into the trucking thing then, and then some of your expertise. I mean, because this is like you said, people are starting to talk about it now. It's like hit us personally, right? It's hit us very hard in Canada here. Because I remember growing up and thinking like the truckers were the icons of the road. Like they were the safest people. You trusted the truckers, right? I remember just having that sort of innate thing, like the truckers are the cool, you'd be doing the thing and getting the horn blowing, and you trusted the truckers and
Knights of the road.
Yeah, man. And it was like you'd follow them through the blizzards and whatever it was, like you just knew that everything was safe when they were driving on the road, everything was safe. But that seemed to change, but it changed farther back than we realized, I guess, right? You get into in your book, I've heard you talk a little bit about how complex the situation is, and it's not just a recent thing since post like COVID, right?
No, and that's the sort of the arc of my book is trying to explain how we got here, right? Like everybody drives, everybody can see it. Anybody that's online sees all the crash videos, the dash cam videos, the news reports, the carnage, the hearing about all these people being killed. And the big problem in the last couple of years is that, high correlation in these incidents with people who arrived in North America basically yesterday. And there's just all of these little tiny trucking companies popping up all over the place that are often run by people from outside the country. And what are they doing here? Why are they here? Why are they all driving like maniacs? Why are these accidents happening? I shouldn't say the word accident. Accidents are preventable. These are collisions. And, the more conspiracy-minded, if I may be so bold, might think that this is a plan. I have no comment on the plan, but I understand why people think that. And my family's been in the trucking business for 3 generations. My grandpa drove a tank, landed a Sherman at Normandy, came home, applied those skills to trucking. My dad was a trucker. My uncles were truckers. I'm a trucker. Been driving truck my whole life. I drove around Hamilton at night without a license when I was a kid. Turned 18, got my Ontario Class A, hit the road, and have been on the road ever since. And I've also traveled a lot. So I drove truck in Australia and New Zealand, and I've been all over North America. And over the last 30 years basically, and I've as you said, it didn't used to be this way. It wasn't so prevalent. I mean, there's always been collisions and accidents and whatnot, like that's sort of unavoidable, but the frequency and people involved have changed quite a bit. And my book sort of looks at the forces which brought those folks here and displaced American and Canadian truck drivers. And it looks at a bunch of other stuff too. It's not just about the displacement of American truckers by migrants. It's also about, the looming imposition of autonomous trucks. It's also about the overregulation of truckers through surveillance technology and video cameras, and the role that lawyering and insurance plays. I try and sort of take a 30,000 foot view, holistic view of the industry. And as you look back through, at least in the last 46 years since 1980, when they passed the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, and that deregulated the industry. It's a pretty momentous piece of change where trucking, which was previously cartelized, difficult to get into business, was completely opened up to anybody with a pulse. If you had $300 to sign up for a motor carrier number, you didn't have to have a truck. You didn't have to have any experience. You could, hire people to do it. Anybody could open a trucking company. Some might say these free market reforms were necessary, but what's happened is in those 46 years since that reform, the industry has gone through an awful lot of just dynamic, rough changes and economic stuff, and how it responded to that initial change in 1980 hasn't exactly worked out. And then how they responded to it caused more problems that begat more regulations and legislation that begat more problems. And, nobody really has figured out what to do. I mean, obviously there's still good trucking companies out there. There's still good specialty operators and guys that still do it correctly. Most of the folks I've worked for, I've had a pretty charmed life in trucking because I know who to avoid. But the larger part of the industry has been having a real hard, difficult time here the last few years, and it's just it's got a lot worse.
Around here, it's you kind of know, because I'm on the road a lot more on sort of the secondary highways than the main highway, the divided highway, and in the cities where you sort of really got to watch. But the sort of rule of the road around here in Alberta is the oil field trucks, you're probably okay, and the farm haulers, the grain haulers, because that's almost always
homeboys. Yeah, it's homeboys. Yeah, no. I spent a lot of time on the prairie, man. I hauled grain and fertilizer for guys down in Brooks. I hauled fuel in northern Alberta. I hauled anhydrous ammonia for these dudes in Saskatchewan. I know exactly what you're saying. The sort of agricultural trucking is still mostly done by farmers and people close to them, and hopefully it stays that way.
Yeah, and the oil field isn't interested in having accidents. They're like, they're not, or at least that's the way it's not prevalent yet, where they've got the safety standards of the safety standards within the companies, right? I mean, you can say this, that, and the other, but you get into industrial safety standards, even from, I was like a welder construction, and it's like, you sort of have tiers, right? Residential, is real cowboy shit. There's no one cares. The chances of you getting caught doing something you shouldn't are almost zero. Then you get into commercial, and it's sort of a whole different ball game depending on the scale of what sort of commercial you're in. But you get into like needing safety officers. You have to start doing all this paperwork, and then you start looking at industrial, and it's like through the roof on top of that. Right now, you've got legislation where you got to go like put a lock on this fucking thing you're working on. 3 different people have to put a lock to hold this thing together. I mean, when I worked in the mine, and on the oil field here, safety is it's really hammered home. I mean, you still do some sketchy shit, don't get me wrong, but they're not ready to turn over the trucking to the lowest bidder. I mean, not only because of the safety culture, but also because they're driving around pieces of equipment that are worth millions and millions and millions of dollars.
That's true. Yeah. I my experience working in the oil patch in northern Alberta is the energy companies are like extremely anal about that stuff, and they have very high risk profiles. They've also been beaten up in the media forever as the bad guys, so they don't want any nonsense. And yeah, everything you just said is true. Starting to see little nibbles around the edges of that here in the States, with the fracking industry. So the guys that do hydro fracking, they use a lot of sand, particular silica sand in that process. And there's been a change in how they move the sand around. It used to be it would go in a specialized dry bulk trailer and then blown off with vacuums, blowers on the truck, and you sort of had to know what you're doing. And they've made that into a containerization program. So they have these things called sand cans that go on these sort of like low bed trucks. And the market for hauling that kind of was given to the lowest bidder. And you're starting to see, especially in Texas, some of the sand can hauling stuff is getting a little bit stupid. But in general, you're right about the safety aspect.
Before we move too far away from it, I just wanted to touch back on because you said it's changed in 1980. Do you think we would have been better under the old way? You mentioned a trucking cartel and it was hard to get into. What did that sort of look like? And do you think we'd be better if that would have just played out for until now?
So that was the old regulated system. And there's a chapter in my book that discusses the pros and cons of the old regulated system versus the unregulated system. I don't know that that system was good. It was like, there's legitimate economic arguments to say that it was bad for consumers and bad for the economy and like made things really expensive, but it also, safety critical industry. It provided a decent enough income for guys. And before 1980, the trucking industry was heavily unionized by the Teamsters. There's pros and cons to all of this. I think those reforms, the deregulatory reforms, were necessary. I just think they swung too far in the opposite direction. There should have been more barriers to entry into getting a truck driving operating authority. Having a pulse and $300 is not enough. But the previous cartelization was also sort of bad. So.
Yeah, I heard you talking to Bonehead Truckers, the guy from Bonehead Truckers. And
Ike, he's great. Yeah.
You were talking about before we had the sort of the immigration problem, there was another problem where they were talking about the trucking industry, like you needed truckers. So there was it was almost like a myth that you were always short on truckers. So they'd bring people in that, just throw them into trucking, like throw these people that are unskilled or maybe that aren't good for the job, just throw them into trucking. So when did that happen? And was that something that should have been stopped or not let happen? Or was that worse in the States than in Canada, for example?
Well, it looks a little different in each country. So what you start seeing happen in the late 1980s is after the deregulatory reforms come in, you get lots more competition, prices start going down. And so they had to make cuts somewhere. And so driver pay also went down. And a lot of guys just started quitting and moving into other jobs. And that's fine. And that's just, that's life. But instead of, the thing that pisses me off about the sort of free market types, who I am one of, I like to consider myself a free market dude, is everyone demanded the deregulation of the industry. The deregulation had certain advantages, but it also brought certain challenges, right? So they wanted that deregulation. They got it. Now there's a free market in trucking. What they did not want was a free market in labor, because, labor is a commodity like anything else. You start losing it. People don't want to work for you. That means you need to bid the price back up. Well, they don't want to pay. It's difficult for them, and they just rather not do it. So around 1987, we see this white paper come out from an organization called the American Trucking Associations, who are still around and are like one of my enemies. I would like to see them destroyed, and the earth salted where their office once stood. They came up with this driver shortage narrative, right? So they start saying there's not enough truckers. And then they start feeding stories to the media, scare stories. Oh my God, the economy is going to collapse if we don't get another 600,000 truck drivers by 1990. And this narrative that they crafted was useful. It became useful over time to get money from the government to help their member carriers. So if you're a big trucking company that can't keep your drivers and you're turning them over, and a lot of really large trucking companies in the United States have 100% annual turnover. They go through all their drivers in a year, sometimes like 9 months, and that costs a lot of money. They don't want to pay more. They don't want to do anything to change their operations or, work with their customers to fix other problems that truck drivers encounter. So they just got the government to pay for the training programs. So you see this term comes around at the same time called CDL mills. So a lot of the big carriers have their own truck driving schools, and they were able to offload the cost of those schools either onto the students themselves or onto the taxpayer. So it sort of created this sort of corporate welfare program that nobody ever criticized as such, right? So if someone keeps coming back to the government saying we need money for training, there's all these jobs we have, but the people are quitting, it would behoove the government to say, hey, man, we're just throwing money at you guys. But like, what's the problem with the jobs that you keep coming to us for money for these truck driving schools? But because in America, and to a lesser extent Canada, as soon as you say the word job, like people turn their brains off. Jobs are good. Oh, hey, you got a job, Puritan work ethic. And nobody ever questioned the shortage narrative. Nobody ever said, well, hold on a minute. Maybe if you pay these guys more, they'll stick around and they won't quit. Maybe it's a retention problem. Why is this the taxpayer's problem? Why does the government have to subsidize this? Nobody starts asking those questions till a few years ago. And this sort of system, the existing truck driver training system, which is downstream of this bogus shortage narrative, starts running into other changes in society, right? So you've got like open border stuff during Obama and, Bush letting in more people. And this, the Americans have had trouble with their border and with like third world labor for a long time. This isn't new. It just got really ramped up during Biden. So that starts happening. And then the internet happens and, people start doing their homework about the trucking industry before they sign up for these courses. And they're like, why would I go work for this company that's going to keep me on the road for weeks at a time? They don't pay me for any of my delay time. There's no overtime pay. Like, this job sucks, and like everybody keeps quitting. So they start having a hard time getting Americans to sign up for it. And so lo and behold, now we have all these migrants showing up here. And so the new thing is, well, let's put them trucking, right? There's always been sort of seasonal work visas that like different areas of the trucking industry have brought drivers in from Central America to help with like agricultural harvest, stuff like that. But what happens under the Biden administration is, well, COVID. So things start getting really, really weird during COVID, okay? We have a demand spike for trucking. So first off, everybody goes home. There's a brief spike because everyone's like overbuying toilet paper and turning into a prepper overnight. And then by 2021, there's another huge spike in demand because the government's giving everybody money to stay at home. And so everyone's ordering everything on Amazon and various other online outlets, and online shopping goes crazy. And so the trucking market was really hot in most of 2021. Okay, fair enough. Well, what happens is that these mega carriers, the very large trucking companies in the United States who are members of the ATA, their retention problem where they're churning through people between 9 and 12 months, they're gone. That's happening faster because the market's hot. So people with smaller companies will pay more. So their drivers are quitting and going to work for their competition. And, so the ATA comes to the Biden administration and says, hey, we need more drivers, right? They don't say we need to pay the ones we have and figure out how to keep them and let the market do its own thing. We need more drivers. So the Biden administration commissions this thing called the Biden-Harris Trucking Action Plan Task Force. And they bring all of these different people from the trucking industry together to talk with, at the time, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and his friends from McKinsey Consulting.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, McKinsey's up in this. Oh, yeah, psychopaths. So they have these meetings, and they talk to everybody in the industry, like across the spectrum. So they hear from like OOIDA and the Teamsters and the Punjabi American Trucking Association and Real Women in Trucking and all these different advocacy groups, and they hear from academics. They get all this expert testimony, much of which tells Biden there's no shortage of drivers. There's a shortage of pay. The industry has a retention problem. Data scientists from MIT told them that the supply chain crisis with trucking is capacity utilization. Trucks wait too long to get loaded and unloaded at all the different distribution centers and factories and places they go to because, the people that work there are lazy or their systems aren't like suited to the volume of trucks. Fix that and you'll get 40% of your truck capacity on the road again. What does the Biden administration do? They ignore all that. They go with the corporate lobbyists at the ATA. We're going to figure out how to get more drivers. Well, the ongoing investigations from current U.S. DOT Secretary Sean Duffy, which were instigated by research from my friends in Arkansas, American Truckers United, show that a bunch of different states lowered requirements to get CDLs. They start giving out what are called non-domiciled CDLs to people who are not even from America.
So CDL is commercial driver's license?
Yeah, in Canada it would be a class 1 or like Ontario, a class A. Yeah. Okay. So 2021, they start spiking the issue of CDLs. And then in 2022, they do this thing called entry-level driver training, which was this program to make sure that all these new drivers were getting trained properly. Of course, with every government program, it does the opposite. It was self-certified. So like some guy opens a truck driving school, tells the government, oh, yes, I'm giving these guys 100 hours of training, but what he's doing is making them watch YouTube videos and they barely drive the truck at all. So that whole cottage industry opens up. And the long and the short of it, as far as the sort of migrants and trucking in the United States is concerned, is between 2021 and 2025, somewhere between 600,000 and a million CDLs are issued to migrants, refugees, fake asylum claimants, just all these extra people that are in the country because of the open borders crap.
Which is also happening parallel in Canada with the driving schools just popping out of nowhere too. Hundreds of driving schools and people getting their license. Maybe similar, maybe a little more strict in Canada, but maybe similar happening. And maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah. So the issue in Canada is a little bit different. We do have the same problem with the garbage truck driving schools, mostly centered in Brampton and Surrey. And, take from that what you will about those locations. CBC even did a little documentary about this last year. And, they never name names, but you can imply a few things from the accents of the people being interviewed by the CBC. And then also Canada's immigration problem is less about the, just blatant letting people walk over the border. It's the abuse of the temporary foreign worker program, international mobility program, and student visas. So one of the reasons, here's a little nuance for you as to why there's so many Punjabis in trucking in Canada, is that a lot of these people actually came here to go to school to one of these like fake license mills, like the Conestoga College that promises you a business administration degree. And it turns out you're living with 15 other people in an apartment and the school is fake and there's the credentials not recognized. And that whole thing is correlated with the trucking business. So a lot of these Indian guys come here, they go to one of those schools, they discover they've been had. And it's like, well, I'm in Canada, I might as well go work. And there's a whole bunch of other Punjabis in trucking, so I'll go trucking. So a lot of these people that came here to Canada and are now truck drivers never started out as truck drivers. They didn't come here to be truck drivers, a lot of them. And then some of else is what's going on is over and above the school scamming is there's like literal modern day slavery going on. So if you're some young guy in the Punjab, there's no opportunity for you. You meet a recruiter for one of these companies who's in India, and that guy tells you, listen, get me 30 grand. I will get you a visa. I'll get you a job in Canada. And then you go work for my homeboy in Vancouver or Toronto or whatever, but you got to pay us up front first. That's illegal, but they do it anyways. Many of these guys don't have that kind of cake. So their family mortgages their farm or their business or whatever in India. They send their boy to Canada or they illegally enter the US via this route in South America. And they're already in debt, right? They've paid off people smugglers or they've paid off these scammy TFW people. Then they show up here and find out that they're going to be truck drivers and they've never driven anything before. They go to some dodgy CDL school or one of these crappy schools in Canada and they're already in debt and they can't really say no because like their family is counting on them to send money home and they end up being abused by their own, right? So they come here, they work for another Punjabi trucking company that's related to the truck driving school. That's a dodgy truck driving school. It's probably related to the immigration consultant that helped them get there. And every one of these stages, they have to pay all that off. So over and above paying this guy 30 or 40 grand to get into Canada in the first place, now they got to pay for the truck driving school. The carrier they work for is extracting from them. Like these people are literally being like economically exploited to the max, right? And like we have this problem on our roads and nobody's talking about it, right? One time only in the mainstream media has this been brought up, and that was in 2019 by the Globe and Mail. That's 7 years ago now, and nothing's been done about it. The government knows what's going on. All the provinces know what's going on, and they're not doing anything.
Oh, man.
It really seems to have ramped up here since COVID. in Canada. That seems to be like a real tipping point. That seems to be at least maybe it seems like around. I mean, it's just getting worse all the time because we have notoriously bad roads in the winter as well.
Right. So I have a theory on that, on the COVID part. Freedom Convoy, something else I've written about. I went to Ottawa to express my solidarity. I drove back over the border, told PHAC to go to hell, went to Ottawa with a bunch of my friends, hung out, welcomed the Western Convoy into town. In my research for the book, I come to find out if you look at graphs, and you guys have seen these graphs online with the amount of people coming to Canada, either TFW program, International Mobility Program, it starts spiking in 2022. Like through the friggin' roof, like just straight line up. And again, I hate to use this term conspiracy, but like Trudeau gets spanked in the public by the Freedom Convoy, right? Everybody loves it. The only people that don't like it are CBC Canadians and people who've had their brains zapped by, the government, and they're hiding at home. They're afraid of getting the bat flu or whatever. And Trudeau, 3 weeks of the Freedom Convoy, and he really goes hard against the Freedom Convoy. As you know, pursued Tamara Lich and Chris Barber to the ends of the earth, the Coots 4 guys, hundreds of other people you've never even heard of, just all these stupid charges, wasting all these court resources going after them. And, most of the Freedom Convoy was truckers. What's another way Justin Trudeau can punish all of those patriotic Canadian truckers? Well, why not flood the market with people from other countries to compete with them and twist the knife a little more?
I like that. I like that. When I was listening to you and the
Bonehead Truckers. His name is
Truckers.
his name is Ike Stevens. He runs a YouTube channel called Bonehead Truckers. It's pretty prominent here in the States.
Yeah, check it out. A few 100,000 subscribers there. So I was thinking about my own theory about this because I thought it's not just happening in Canada or the States. It's happening in Australia, UK,
Yep.
And it feels like the timing with COVID couldn't have been an accident. It's like everybody's distracted trying to get out of COVID. The world has changed, and then they just put the gas on in all of these Western countries, like all for different ways, right? Like the UK immigration is different than Canada, different than the States, but it's all happening after COVID, like those
right.
Sites. So,
yeah, I'm not 100% sure how much of it has to do with COVID. Maybe it does. Again, with Trudeau for sure. I wrote something on my Substack here after many, many months of looking into this while I was writing the book. And a bunch of this stuff didn't make it into the book. Unfortunately, my editor said, you're writing an encyclopedia and nobody's going to buy an encyclopedia. So they had to hack out 70 pages out of my book, is what it is. So I was looking into this, as you put it, like this Indian truck driver thing is not unique to Canada. It's a big deal in the United States, especially in California. It's big in Indiana. There's a few states where these guys have clusters of all these companies. And it's also happening in Australia and New Zealand to a lesser extent. And it's really happening big time in Australia. And one of the things that's going on here in Canada is there's been committees in Parliament about this thing called Driver Incorporated. And that term was like a name that the Canadian Trucking Alliance, who's like the Canadian version of the ATA, gave to a tax avoidance scam where trucking companies do not hire drivers as employees. You're considered a contractor, even though the relationship is as an employee driver. You're driving their truck, you're taking their directions, hauling their freight. There's no independent employment going on here, right? It's misclassification. That program has ramped up in Canada at the same time as all of these guys from the Punjab and other countries are flooding into the market. The same thing happens in Australia, and it's called sham contracting, where you have an ABN number, an Australian business number, and instead of being an employee driver, you are a contractor, even though the relationship is you're basically an employee. But what that does is the employer doesn't have to pay here in Canada, Canada Pension Plan, employment insurance, payroll tax. There's all kinds of money that the government's not getting. And then the driver is also not getting any benefits or anything else out of it, right?
Overtime, all kinds of stuff.
No,
right?
yeah. So the CTA, whom I loathe, are correct about the effects that it has on the market, because it makes it allows these companies to undercut vastly undercut the rate structure of like indigenous Canadian trucking companies that are from here that employ Canadians. And it makes it very difficult for them to compete because these other guys, they're just not paying the same taxes everybody else is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The other thing I was thinking is, and you almost answered it there with your theory, but when you were explaining the mills in the States, because there's so much other corruption happening in the States now too, like all this stuff is coming to light. So it almost feels like this is just what happens in this situation. Like, or do they plan? I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, have you found evidence that in Canada or the States that these drivers, school, mills, and all this is kind of like one big plan, or is it just that the conditions are ripe for this kind of corruption? Like it just because they've been sort of lax and because they don't have the standards and the, I don't know if regulations is the right word, but like it's opened it up so that this just inevitably happens. Like how much of it is it planned compared to just like set up wrong and not monitored at all?
It's both. Let me explain. So yes, what's happening is that these foreign actors getting into our trucking industry are taking advantage of a mess, post-COVID mess, Biden immigration mess, CDL mills, states giving out licenses to people on very reduced, barriers to entry and standards. The feds not having any way to chase these people down, and then the lack of enforcement on what's called chameleon carriers, right? So these small little companies that are often run by guys from overseas that only hire migrant drivers, they openly discriminate against Canadian and American truckers. They will not hire locals. Like it's well, it goes deep, man. But what happens is these guys, because they're incompetent and all they care about is making money and to hell with highway safety, they eventually get caught by the DOT, too many inspections, and then their insurance cancels, or Amazon Relay or whatever company they contract to won't hire them anymore. So what they do is they've got this new practice called chameleons. So basically they take the trucks and the drivers and move them to another LLC. They move them to another entity. Okay.
Wow.
And then they just pop back up again the same day. And you'll probably see videos of this and photos online of these guys with trucks, and they have like a taped on piece of paper with their motor carrier registration number like written on it in marker. And that's what they're doing because the company they worked for yesterday got canceled. So they have to slap a new company name on the door and keep on trucking. But the owner's the same, the drivers are the same, the trucks are all the same. And so the government can't keep up with this. They're trying now. I think Secretary Duffy here in the U.S. is aware of what's going on, but they just don't have the resources. And the one agency, the sub-agency of U.S. DOT that's supposed to look after trucking in the United States is called the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And it's half staffed by people that used to work for the American Trucking Associations. It's that sort of lobbying to regulator revolving door where on one side, one day you're working for corporations to try and get the government to do your bidding in DC. The next day you're working in DC doing that thing, but on the government side of it. FMCSA needs to fire like half of its staff because they're like former ATA people. And then they also need to like focus their efforts more because they're just playing whack-a-mole with a lot of this stuff,
Yeah. So I was thinking about the driver's licenses. Like, I think, Darren, do we have to be Canadian to get a proper driver's license? Like, I think you have to be a citizen, right? Or no? Because
no,
you don't in Canada either.
I doubt it.
Because isn't the States isn't part of the problem? Because when I went back when I traveled in like the early 90s, I had to have an international driver's license. Like, I couldn't just go and get a license in Italy or the UK, because isn't that a problem in the States where the licenses are just given to anybody? So then it's almost like a citizenship thing, but not quite. So then they use that as ID. Is that what's sort of popping up? It seems to me like there's a bit of a disconnect there with like what you should almost have to be a citizen to be able to drive legally.
Well, you would think in the United States, CDLs are actually administered by the states, right? So your fraud that was exposed amongst the Somali community in Minneapolis and how they're like ripping off daycares and Medicaid fraud and this fraud and that fraud, all of that's tied together with trucking. because Minnesota hands out licenses to whoever. You don't have to be a citizen. You don't have to even have a work visa. Like some states will literally give licenses to illegals, and that includes truck licenses, right? And then what I was saying before about this entry-level driver training program that was supposed to make sure guys were getting trained. Well, again, self-certified, and a lot of these same gangsters who were led into the country in these places, California, Minnesota. I mean, it happens in Texas too. People have been beating up on this as a blue state thing, but the number one state in the country for issuing non-domiciled CDLs is Texas, right?
I'm assuming. Well, Graham, just to answer your question, it says here, you do not need to be a Canadian citizen to get a driver's license. This is just drivers, not trucking, but as trucking is just sort of a like an extension of your driver's license, right? So once you get the driver's license, I'm assuming you can,
well, you might have to get a
driver's license
to get a class 1 or a class A or whatever it was that you still need to be so for
you need to get
an equivalent of a CDL.
In Canada, you just need to have a permanent resident card, a work permit, a study permit, which would be the temporary residence, or even just a visitor record, which I'm assuming a visitor record is what we're giving to all like the people that are coming in and saying they're refugees or this and that we're paying money to,
right?
All that.
Because don't we use our driver's license to vote, like for voter ID in Canada? Don't we?
Well, before we get into that, let's jump into the second half of the show here. Sign up over at GrimericaOutlaw.ca, and we'll get into because I have some questions about. I want to really get into the immigration stuff and stuff like that. But yeah, let's jump in. People, if we want to get the full shows, GrimericaOutlaw.ca.
Okay, because the voter thing is coming up now with all the voter ID and all it, right? The Safe Act, and it's mind-boggling to most of us that this is even an issue. But I feel like part of it is because in the States you just use is that why people are freaking out about